Always a pleasure being. All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure being, on the same platform as Dr. TQ and of course all the other panelists that are here. So, mental health is something that, we here in the DMV that we have struggled and we continue struggling to raise awareness to. But when you talk about, Black communities, I'll also introduce myself and tell you that I'm an immigrant. I'm sure you can tell from my from my accent, which has not quite left me. We struggle just like everybody else, right? When you talk about the um, the social justice, the racial justice, the economic justice, it affects everybody. It affects everybody. So, you go back to the history, the legacy of this country that was founded on, and the challenges that we all face. So, when you talk about social justice and mental health, you're talking about inclusion versus exclusion. We know that social justice promotes inclusion, respect, equal opportunities for all, which evidently leads to a sense of belonging and self-worth. However, when the laws are against everybody, right, and we're trying to fight for the social justice that could evidently help everybody's mental health, then that's where the problems come in. From an immigrant perspective, all immigrants, when we all come to this country, right, we come for one thing, economic stability, right? But you cannot have economic stability and a better livelihood when you have all these other challenges, right? That's where all our traumas come in. That's where, all these advocacy that we're doing, comes out. But when it comes to really addressing it in the communities where we live, there are more challenges because from an immigrant, from an immigrant perspective, we don't want to be associated with the word mental health. We don't want to be associated with that. Now, let me share a personal story. A couple of years ago, I was going through some hardships, and I shared with a friend of mine that I'm seeing a therapist. And her response was, "You don't need a therapist. You don't need anybody else to come and tell you what to do." Not forgetting that, all of us, at some point throughout the lifespan, we go through things. Life changes, family comes in, work discrimination, our communities being marginalized. We go through a lot of things. All these things affect us. So when you talk about stigma in our predominantly immigrant communities that we serve, it is real. It is real. Something we struggle with every single day, just simply because we don't want to be associated with the word mental health. Every time, we're out there trying to educate folks on mental health and the challenges that we face. You know what I hear a lot? That's for other people. It's not for us. And you start wondering, how do I tailor this? How do I package this so my audience can fully understand that no one is exempted from having a breakdown? Because when you look at the statistics, 1 in every 5 Americans, right, has either had a mental health crisis, is going through a mental health crisis, or will go through a mental health crisis. Those statistics, even I'm even actually trying to figure out, maybe it's 1 in every 3 Americans, post-pandemic. So it is something that, it continues to be a struggle to try to erase that stigma, you know, because, again, and I'm going to stress the immigrant community because that's who we serve, predominantly immigrant community, those who we serve. You know, it is, it continues to be a struggle to really talk about the stigma, and within the immigrant community, we have also our own circles, right? Whereby if let's say one of us comes out and talks about a condition they're going through, the immediate thought is Maybe you might be doing something wrong. Did you go to church? Dr. Tik, you talked about church earlier. Did you go to church? Did you talk to your pastor? Did you talk to the preacher? Maybe we need to fast about it. And that's where a lot of challenges come in. And that's where, even stigma gets bigger and bigger because we fail to understand, the scientific findings, um, life situations, circumstantial situations that can affect us along the way.
Yeah. Thank
So,
you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
thank you. I know
Thank
my
you.
time is almost up.
Well, no, that's good that you honed in on a lot of that information. And so we're going to carry that information that you were talking, especially from an immigrant's perspective. And we're going to have a nice, deep, inside, in-depth, more conversation on that. So I'm going to allow Miss Monique Bailey to introduce herself. You're on mute.
I do apologize. I said I might need to take that off so y'all can hear me. So, good morning. I'm Monique Bailey. I'm a retired military vet. I served in the Air Force for over 20 years. I'm a wife, a mother. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in human service counseling, and I want to gear it towards mental health. I have a certification in youth mental health first aid. And besides having my own struggles with my mental state being in the military, I had to deal with one of my children having a phase where they were feeling down, depressed, and not really understanding what they were going through, and just trying to help them to navigate through those emotions. So I had to quickly educate myself on what they were going through. And my husband and myself decided it was best if we found a counselor that they were willing to be more open and talk to. So we got him the help that he needed. On the veteran side of things, when you're in a leadership position in the military, you often have to deal with subordinates that have their own mental health struggles. So you being in that leadership position, you're normally the one that they come to. So you have to equip yourself with the resources so you can provide it to them so they can get the help that they need. Oftentimes you have troops, it's their first time away from home, never been anywhere, never been away from their parents, and it becomes very hard and challenging for them, and they struggle. So with that being said, I got the resources that was needed. I helped them get the treatment they were needed. And so that's where I've had experience dealing with mental health. I've had to actually physically take someone to a mental health office because I didn't want them to harm themselves or anyone else. I pride myself on helping others overcoming challenges, and I'm passionate about talking about these things. So I'm excited about being a part of this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Miss Bailey, and thank you for your service again. And I'm excited to have more conversations in reference to the veteran perspective. And also thank you for being transparent regarding your own child and the journey that you had to do as a mother. I can only imagine how that might feel. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Okay. Last but not least, we have Dr. Latasha, Miss Ireland.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Latasha Ireland, I go by Dr. I. Just like Monique, I served 20 years in the Air Force, the greatest branch, my perspective. um, so just being in the military alone, it's a lot of mental health issues you have to deal with. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. I have 3 daughters that I'm also helping with mental health issues, along with my husband, who I've been married to for 20 years now. And with my background, I have a PhD in psychology, and then I have a master's in political science with concentration into public policy. So with that integration with the psychology plus the politics and policy, I naturally was driven more towards the research side of everything. So looking at the research that plays into the policies that are constructed And then I also do with the human performance. So looking at the performance, why we act the way we act, why we behave the way we behave, and then the systems that we create and how we create them systems and how we operate in systems that are already created. So I'm excited to share insights that I've had throughout my research journey. And I thank you for Health E Strategies for inviting us to come in and talk about this much needed topic in our Black communities.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. I. Again, thank you for your service. So I'm super excited. As you guys can see, we have a wealth of knowledge. So we have different perspectives. We have a research perspective. We have a veterans perspective. We have a immigration perspective. All of these perspectives are extremely needed to talk about because it's real life experiences. So Miss Bailey, I'm going to start with you. You stated you're a mother, you're a wife, and you're also a veteran. So, especially from a veteran's perspective, why do you think there is such a big stigma concerning mental health concerns in the Black community? And what have you personally experienced around this issue, especially in the veteran community?
Okay, that's a great question. I do believe that the stigma stems from our cultural backgrounds. There's a lack of cultural sensitivity in the healthcare professionals, leaving Blacks to feel marginalized, right? So Blacks are less likely to seek the help that they need. Growing up in a Black household, at least surrounding my household and how we grew up, you never really talked about your emotions. You never really talked about what you were feeling. You never really expressed if you were hurt or sad about anything. You pretty much bottled it up, pressed on because you didn't want to look weak and you had to have a strong exterior. I think that was instilled in us because of all the adversities that we as Blacks or our parents and grandparents and ancestors had to experience. And when we overcame those adversities, it was instilled in us that we have to be strong. We have to be strong. So in the military, being Black, you already have one strike against you, right? And it's not really intentional against any other races, but we are like our Black males may be looked at as being lazy, and so they have to work even harder to fit in with a white coworker because they don't want to be looked at that way. Um, Being a Black female, you have two strikes because you're Black and you're a female. And so therefore you have to keep a strong exterior, not be deemed as the angry Black female. You have to be strong. You have to know your stuff because you have to present that and you have to carry yourself in a certain way. So even with all of that going on, you have to internalize everything. And so there's a lot of stresses that you're dealing with on a daily basis. And we tend to not forego treatment because we don't want it to hinder our careers within the military. Oftentimes, if you're going to pursue a new duty station or a special duty assignment, one of the questions that you're tend to ask is, have you been seen by a mental health within the last 6 months or just a time frame? And then if you answer yes, you'll probably get a notification back saying you're ineligible for this career enhancement. Oh, you can't go to this new duty location because we don't know if you're stable enough. They don't say it in those words, so that's pretty much how it's implied. So a lot of people go and say no, even though they're internally fighting their selves and their emotions and their struggles because they want to succeed in their military career. Although the resources are there, we are very hesitant about going to utilize them because we want to progress in our careers. And we just basically struggle internally.
Wow, thank you, Miss Bailey. And you honed in on a lot of different things that I could ask a lot of questions about. But your first thing that you actually mentioned was that's the first strike against you. Like you have to go, it seems as if you go into a situation with the target on your back anyway, right? And so just
Right.
because you're a female just because you're Black, right? And so like you go into that situation with those odds against you just because you were born the way that you were born, right? And so, and I appreciate you being transparent and honest in reference to also the military perspective and like how the participants, the soldiers, the employees of the military are navigating that system, that healthcare system. It's like one of those things, well, do I really want to get help? And if I still want to get help, then it could go against me. So it's like one of those, you're stuck between a rock and a hard spot. So it's just, I never knew that information regarding the perspective of the military, but it's good that you're able to say that so that other people can know, right? And so maybe there could be some change moving forward. But thank you. And you also talked a little bit about, the family, like growing up, thinking about how your grandmother was and like the stuff that our grandmothers had to face and how that's passed down from generation to generation. So as I talk about that, Dr. Bawalawi, in the past, the Black community has made enormous contributions to the ongoing fight of social, racial, and economic injustice. Just like all of our, like Ms. Bailey talked about, her grandparents, my grandparents, all of our grandparents, right? Systemic barriers disproportionately impact mental health in the Black community. So from your observation, experience, and research, what are some of these barriers? And you mentioned some a little bit earlier, so.
Yeah, when you look at research, right, research has specific barriers that everybody knows. But when you break it down and actually come into communities and communities of communities, and then you have your hard-to-reach communities, they're all different barriers, which changes the dynamic of the discussions, right? But for instance, within the immigrant communities that we predominantly serve, you have things like language barriers, right? If you have a language barrier, then there's that, the health literacy sense that, everybody talks about, how are they going to be able to understand what's being told to them or what's being shared with them, all right? So there are barriers such as access to care. We know there's a shortage of providers that actually are there to take care of us, but also a shortage of providers who look like us, who will understand our circumstantial and situational factors, right? So now, again, back to the immigrant community, right? We do have also barriers such as acculturation, assimilation. When people migrate to a country that is not their country of origin, right? They're going to be challenges of culture, to make sure to integrate in that culture. It's one of the hardest things. Understand how the culture is made up of. I mentioned earlier about, the legacy of certain things such as, justice, social justice and discrimination and all that. A lot of people that migrate here, they don't understand that piece until something happens, right? That's a barrier, not understanding the history. So if you don't understand the history, how are you going to be able to try to understand some of the challenges we face? So those are the things that we keep on bringing awareness and being in the space of advocacy, health equity, right? Bringing care for all. It is very hard, going back to stigma. And that's where all the stigma comes in, because we don't want to what? We don't want to talk about it. There are barriers, other barriers like in employment, right? If we are not given the opportunity to have that equitable opportunities that are whereby having good employment will also give you the chance to see maybe a better, have better healthcare, that is a problem. Because a lot of people that we see also, we refer to them under the table workers, they're laborers who necessarily don't have all the access to the care. It's a barrier. So again, in research, we have these standardized barriers, but when you really come down to everyday person's livelihood, there are all kinds of barriers, generational structure. is a barrier itself, because a generation thought this way, and then it carries on. Now, how do you break that? How do you bring more awareness to that? So there's a lot of challenges that we face, barriers that have led to the stigma that we see every day. And of course, Dr. Allen will talk about, since she's the psychologist here, she'll talk about more of how, treatment plans. How do you place that into your treatment plans when you're seeing all these complexes that are coming with the different clients that we see on a daily basis?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Anita. And one thing that stood out for me was you talked about cultural integration, right? We never think about that from an immigrational perspective. Just imagine, right? You're in your house and somebody comes knocking on your door and say, grab a few items. I want you to come and live in my house. So now you're like, okay, now this is a whole different environment. This is a whole different culture. What can I do? What can I do? What I have access to? What I don't have access to? So cultural integration is something that we should be always mindful of. And I appreciate you highlighting that as being a barrier. So I know Dr. Anita had mentioned you, Dr. I, in reference to your psychological perspective. So I'm going to tap right into you real quick. So from a historical dehumanization, oppression, and violence against Black and African-American people has evolved into present-day racism, structural, institutional, and individual, and cultivates a uniquely distrustful, less affluent community experience. So from a psychological perspective, how has historical oppression impacted the current mental health of the Black community?
Well, when we listen to, like Bailey mentioned, about some of these workplace stereotypes that you have, or these stigmas, or Dr. Anita was talking about adjusting to systems that were created with you not in mind of that system. So we look at different human performance. So the behavior, why we behave the way we do, what's our personality, why we think the way we think, why we make certain decisions. When we look at the human performance, a lot of that has to, the systems that we create affect our performance. So we as individuals, we have a multitude of systems that we create. We have simple systems like the system you have that, but you wake up in the morning, how you get your kids ready for school. It's a system to that. For more complex, it's a system of how you raise your family as collective. So when we create these systems that we create typically are made up of things like beliefs, values, assumptions, experiences, sometimes biases. So we create these systems that we have, and this is how we operate. And then so we have our personal systems, and let's say we go into another system that's already created. So earlier when Monique was talking about in the military has a system. It's developed, which the origin of it was developed with white males in mind. So everything about it, the foundation of it is for the white male to prosper in that environment. So here you are, a Black person coming into the military, you have your own system, your own way of things. So now you're expected to adjust to this new system. And so that's when we come up with the different manners of adaptability and change. We know that change, evolving is good, right? So it's good to change because then you're getting better. But then there's certain things that you should not change, like your core principles and your values. And sometimes we find ourselves changing those things, trying to fit into a system that was not designed for us. So we have to identify and really understand that sometimes the systems that are already created are set for you to fail. But what happens is a lot of people in the Black community don't really recognize it. So they take it and they internalize it. And then now we have internal racism. So now we're mad at ourselves. We're down on ourselves. We're not good enough. We have low self-esteem. We're trying everything we can to adapt our lives so we can fit into this system that was not designed for us. Same thing with if we're looking at predominantly white universities. Predominantly white universities have most of the resources, they have most of the funding, and they have these systems that they have created. And this system was created to elevate the white community. So when you have people, Black people who are trying to get into these systems, again, and then when we create these systems, we create security measures to our systems. So even our individual systems, I have a parenting system. It's a way that I parent my kids. It's a way that I discipline my kids. So if somebody comes in and they discipline my kids the way I discipline them, I might let it slide. But if they come in and they're going against my system, then my security measures is going to block that intruder and say, no, I don't want you in this system because you're messing up what I have. And when we look at white institutions, that's the same concept. They have these security measures that they have established that are in their policies, their procedures, their traditions. They write these requirements that they know is going to be difficult for Black community to upstand. So they write these in there because it's going to be hard. And then with those that do meet those requirements, they probably are at the top of the list of what the Black community is. So even at the point to where you have the Black community, they might get past those security firewalls of a predominantly white university, right? But once they get in that university, there's programs that have more barriers. So you're constantly fighting this battle of being better, being 10 times better. And when you do this, that's when you get some of these mental health issues because we're not really recognizing, hey, there's a barrier. I'm not getting it because they have making it almost sometimes impossible for me to make it. But we internalize it and say, well, we're not good enough. Or we say, we try and then we give up and say, the white people against us, we don't want to do it. So we just leave it alone and then we go to something else, right? And then same thing in the medical system. So you have studies, historical studies to where they examine the white male's brain against a Black male's brain. And because the Black male brain did not match the white male's brain, the Black male was deemed ignorant, they weren't capable of leading, and they couldn't do any critical thinking. So if you think of historic psychological evaluations like this are the foundations to some of the instruments that we use to assess our people to say whether they're mentally fit or they're not mentally fit. So that questions, is that really accurate? So that's another thing that we need to do. And then when you look at it, right now, approximately in the United States, 5% of the psychologists are Black. 5%.
5%.
And of that 5%, a smaller percentage of that are researchers that actually do research to where their findings are actually incorporated in the mental health strategies and tools that we use to address mental health issues in our community. Let that sink in. So then another issue we have is intergenerational trauma, which is, so when our ancestors, we as individuals didn't probably go through slavery or Jim Crow laws, but our ancestors did. And so their trauma that they went through is passed down through behaviors, emotion patterns, the way we think, our mentality. So there's things that they went through that we're dealing with today in our generation. So great grandma June might have had some mental health issues that wasn't apparent, but now cousin Lou is out of her mind because she never really got that addressed. So we pass these things around, pass these behaviors without looking at these behaviors and saying, what is the root of this behavior? Why are we acting this way? We just say, oh, they're crazy, they need to go seek help. No, we need to really dig deep and find out what's going on. So just to sum it up, racism back then during slavery and the Jim Crow laws, it was in your face. It was there. So if you were Black and you tried to go to a white institution, it was no, because you're Black, you can't come. Or they had signs. This is for the Black people. This is for the white people. Now it's not so much in your face. It's those policies and those rules and those procedures and that culture. And sometimes we don't understand that that is what's blocking us, not our abilities. So instead of us down in our community, we need to work as a community and break down some of these barriers that they have established throughout these years.
Dr. I, honey, let me just do one of these. Honey, oh my goodness. Yes, you tapped in on a lot from a systemic perspective. Then you tapped into internal racism because we don't think about that. Like, we don't talk about that. We don't have conversations about that. And yet, back then, like I know my grandmother, she went through racism and like my mother, Jim Crow and civil rights movement. We're just a few generations from the civil rights movement. You guys realize that, right? Right. Because I can remember my mom said, yeah, that's the school that we went to when we were segregated. And like she had these conversations, like she had to experience that. But it was in their face, like you talked about. Now it's not all up in their face, but it's put into policies, rules, those cultures, the system. And we have to educate our brothers and sisters. And how do we see this and how do we identify this? Right. But I mean, I can have a conversation with each and every one of you ladies on a one-on-one basis. You guys are giving so much wealth and so much knowledge. So as we continue, we're going to talk a little about research. This is going to be for you, Dr. I and Dr. Anita. So the research suggests that Black emerging adults to ages 18 to 25, they experience higher rates of mental health problems and lower rates of mental health service utilization compared to white emerging adults and older Black adults. So as a researcher, as an educator, what other research is out there that's surrounding the Black community and mental health? And so what are some of the best practices that you guys use and see with the work that you're doing? I will let you go first, Dr. Anita.
I think, for me, the best practices is how we educate folks. It's to me, that's the most fundamental practice. How do you educate? How do you address some of the issues that we see? Right? Because, when you look at the blueprints of all the practices, and the word, you and I have talked about, the word best practices, right? Honestly, I prefer promising practices, right? That's what I love to share. What are the promising practices out there? Is how we educate. How do we break it down? How do we look at the social justice, the racial justice, the economic justice, and break it down? How do we navigate through the systems? Dr. You talked about, you did such an amazing job to really talk about one of those, as Dr. TQ did. It's the system by design. How do you navigate through the systems that have been created that are not in your face visibly, but how do we go behind that to elevate the Black community, brown and Black community, to do well? To me, the promising practices, and I remember sharing this with one of my colleagues, would be, to start with the schools. Open up more schools for people of color to get into some of these facilities and departments, and let's get educated and fill up some of these spots, providers to help some of brown and Black people who are facing crises. Because if practices or treatment plans are based on one race, but not addressing the other race, that is a problem right there. And we keep on seeing that. I mean, I'm sure each of you have sat in so many conferences, and what do you hear? Research is done on only one side of the aisle. But what about this? We do a lot of continuing education units here, and you hear all these things, and that sometimes it's very frustrating. So, like, Dr. I mentioned, it's just us coming together and figure out, how do we start even a more heightened movement to get down and address this from a ground up, address this whole stigma.
Yeah.
So to me, I would tell you that, I lean more towards promising practices versus best practices. What is out there, what has worked for me that I can actually get and use it elsewhere, and it has some promises. And a lot of some of the issues that we see, it's every day, it's day-to-day challenges, circumstantial, situational challenges, which are all as a result of systems that have been designed to keep people either at the lowest of the lowest, which also contributes to the lowest self-esteem. So, and that's what I would tell you, that, promising practices are where I lean.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Anita. Look, Dr. I, your input.
So Dr. Anita hit it right on. So my first thought, right, when we talk about ages 18 through 25 and experiences high rates of mental health problems, is who are these participants? Are these university students? Are these people that's in the judicial system? Like, who are the participants that they're saying? And most importantly, how are we measuring mental health problems? What are we doing to distinguish whether it's a problem or is it not a problem? Those are the things that we need to look at as a community, as a Black community. We're always waiting to the final product. Here's the final policy. And then we don't like the policy. So then we're now trying to find initiatives to dismantle this policy. But we need to be in the policy making process. We need to be there doing the research, feeding the policy, feeding congressmen these different research initiatives. If we're not at the forefront of this, it's going to be difficult for us to come back and dismantle some of this. So that's the number one thing, is we need to stop waiting to the product and figure out what are the mechanisms, what are the processes of getting these policies pushed. And then when we talk about different types of strategies or best practices. So there's a lot of research out there. Well, I'm not going to say a lot. Let me use my words. There's small, but a lot. When I talk about, when you're talking about gear where Black psychologists or Black mental health professionals are doing research compared to our white counterparts. So that's why I said I don't want to say a lot, but we do have research out there. But after all the research that I've done, the reading I've done, and there's a lot of attributes that we as a community have developed. And I feel like we need to hone more into what we've already know is good, what we've already witnessed to be good. And although there's a lot of attributes, it's three things that I want to highlight today that I feel like we need to really focus our point back there. The first thing is resilience. We are typically good in our foundation of God, whoever your God is, whoever you serve, that being the foundation of what we do, which builds our resiliency. And then the second thing is innovation. We are good at making nothing into something. We get stripped of everything that we have, and then we turn right around and turn it into something. And then the third thing is diversity. We know how to diversify something, to multiply it, to make it be powerful. So I would say the best practices is what we already know that we're capable of doing, which we're capable of being resilient, putting our God first, and then we're capable of being innovative, creating something out of nothing, and then taking that innovation that we've created and multiplying it, and now building our communities where we can now again move as a unit to dismantle some of this stuff. And we have to stop letting other communities come into our communities to tell us what we are doing wrong or right in our communities when they don't even know anything about our communities. We need to make sure that we are the ones that's pushing the narrative of what we need within our community, not outside sources.
Amen. Amen, Dr. I. One thing that all you guys are just wonderful, and I appreciate each and every one of you guys for your expertise and your knowledge and your perspective, because I think it's very important, because all of you guys have honed in on a lot of stuff. But one thing that you mentioned, Dr. I, which is a shift in my life, what I'm focusing on is advocacy, right? So we have to be at the table. We have to, because change starts here, right? And it comes with policies, it comes with legislations, it comes with having your politicians co-signing different bills. So I'm learning about that, because I used to be the grassroots person, but I'm realizing there's no change happening in this community. So what level do I have to go? You have to do the advocacy work. So that's, now you have to use your education, you have to use your voice, because change happens at the top. And that's just how our system is created. That's just how our system is. So we have to go out and do what we got to go out and vote. We got to go out and make sure that the people that we want in the seat is going to make those choices and sign those policies and those legislative bills that's going to be in favor of our community. So, very good conversation. So I'm going to probably call each and every one of you guys back to have one-on-one conversations. But I'm going to get one last question to Ms. Bailey. Okay, so the experience of being Black in America varies greatly, and you just mentioned a little bit about, being a mom, being a wife, being a veteran. But there are some shared cultures that play a role in helping define mental health and supporting well-being. And Dr. I talked about resiliency and healing. So, what do you believe some of these cultures, these cultural factors are?
So I believe it could be positive and negative. I believe one of the biggest factors is not having a proper access to healthcare. We, the Black community, are less likely, like I said before, to seek or have healthcare. Living in poverty can help and living in poverty can also limit the resources that Blacks have in their community, such as a proper hospital or one that provides the treatment that one may need, grocery stores, or even recreational activities. So it can cause families to become stressed and there's no outlet. So then they don't know how to deal with their emotions, right? So although some may have the healthcare coverage, it may not be enough to where they can afford the treatment that's needed. But on a positive note, I believe some of the factors are the family connection, meaning the background in which we grew up, the religion, and the values that were instilled in you. Although they may impact individuals differently, having the strength and support from your family and friends play a huge factor because we, like Dr. Ireland said, we often rely on our family, we rely on our religion and the God that we serve. So with their community and spiritual support, they'll look that way instead of getting a medical professional. They draw strength from economic minorities, I would say. And when your family advocates for you to get counseling or to help you maneuver through the stresses and traumas that you experience, I believe that in itself helps the community.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you guys. And I just want to open up the floor and just say, I want you guys to just give me a final thought, a walk away. What is the one thing that you guys can say to the community and about how we can decrease the stigma associated with mental health in the Black community? Just one closing remark from each and every one of you guys. So Monique, you want to go first?
Sure. I believe we can decrease the stigma by changing the narrative. Like, I had to be open with my child and talk about his feelings. So if you talk to your kids and tell them it's okay, that they don't have to always be strong, because that's what was instilled to us. But let them know it's okay to talk about their feelings and their emotions. And if they need to talk to someone, help them seek that person that they need to talk to. Um, Social media can be viewed as a negative platform for mental health awareness, but let's make it positive. Everyone is on some type of social media platform, so blow it up. Advocate for mental health awareness, provide resources every chance you get. Even if you're just sitting in a doctor's office and you overhear someone's conversation, if you can help them out, help them out. I think when they see it coming from another Black member, they'll be more open to getting the help that they need. And if we just continue to fight together, I think we can make the community better. And always shout out your Black mental health professionals, because I think with them doing it, a lot more people would be. If we had more Black mental health professionals, I think more Blacks would be open to getting the help that they need.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Dr. Anita?
Let me share, some of the things that we're doing within our communities, and those are community conversations. Now you have the individual households, but then what about the communities where we live? So within, communities, you also have, leaders, community leaders, right? So we start from that, having this community conversation and address it more like your living style, kind of setting. So in our cultures, we have this thing called under the mango tree. I love that concept under the mango tree, where everybody comes up and let's talk about the issues that are actually affecting our communities. Let's start with the economic stability. Let's start with housing. Let's start with access to care. How do we navigate through that? Let's bring in, some of our representative, the county councilmen, county council women, and let them hear some of the challenges we face. Let's talk about, the deserts, the access to care deserts. Let's talk maternal health deserts. Let's talk about the resource deserts that we have. How do we bring more resources in here so that, providers understand that there's a need in this community? If we don't do that, then we'll continue having this conversation. So, overall, I would say, advocacy is key. Advocacy is not, your the level of education one may have. Advocacy is anyone and everybody. So that's something that we are empowering our communities to jump onto this advocacy journey with us, and let's address some of the challenges that we see to make better communities.
Awesome. Thank you. Final thoughts, Ms. Ireland, Dr. I.
So I have two points. One is we have to, like Monique mentioned, we have to support our Black mental health professionals. Even if, we're used to doing something, like I was talking about the systems. We're so used to a system going this way. So if you get someone that's doing something against the system, and I'll do this sometimes too, like what are they doing? But however, look into it, look deeper into it. Even though the mechanism or the manner in which they're doing something may not seem right, look at their overall vision. What is it that they're trying to do? Because you have to do something different to get a different result. So we have to go against the system in order for us to create a new system. So I would say just make sure we be a little bit more deliberate about supporting our Black counterparts. And then the second thing is, the resources are resources, but the problem is, are these resources adequate to our community? That's the biggest thing. There's abundance of resources out there. So I'm not saying that mental health resources that are out there now or tools or techniques are not helpful for the Black community. But what I'm saying is we need customized, tailored resources. So it's just like you having your phone, right? The phone is a good product. We live by a phone. Everything is on our phone. But I guarantee you the apps that I have on my phone is different than the apps that Monique have on her phone. Why? Because it's customized to what I'm comfortable with, what works for me, what has worked for my productivity. So that's the same concept we need to do in our communities. We can use these resources, but we need more resources on top of that that are tailored to the direct need and call for action in our Black communities.
Yes,
Awesome.
Dr. T,
Go ahead.
allow me to make a comment. Dr. I, thank you so much. Customization of the needs, that's key. As we go out in these communities, or in our individual communities or respective communities, and talk about some of the issues, how do we customize programs for particular communities? And then, which brings me back to best practice, which I don't really lean towards. So the promising practices, customization to the needs of particular communities or individual communities, that's a key.
Yes, yes. Wow, ladies, this has been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I want to thank each and every one of you, Dr. Anita, Miss Monique, and Dr. I, for your time, your talent, your expertise. I learned so much from each and every one of you guys. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to share that wealth of knowledge with the community. So thank you everybody who has joined the meeting. This is recorded, so I will be sending out, for those that registered, the link to the recording. So thank you everybody for joining, and be looking forward to more conversations in the future. Take care.
Thank you.